happy to be chairing this special event on the 10 years of EISA, taking stock and looking forward with the previous governing board members of our association. So founded in 2013, the European International Studies Association's aim was to establish a regional community of international relations scholars and to create a new space for discussions and exchanges. Since then, the association's membership has grown tremendously, and the Pan-European Conference and the European Workshops in International Studies have become key events for IR scholars based in Europe and beyond. EISA has also developed a strong commitment to the support of early career scholars, to generate meaningful conversations, and to create new spaces for publications. So more than 10 years on, this panel brings together members of the association's governing board since its creation to discuss the EISA's history as well as ideas for its future. So, as said, I am the chair of this event as the current president of the EISA, and today I am joined by five distinguished colleagues, Thomas Diez, Victoria Basham, Valeria Bello, Maria Mälksoo, and Thierry Balzacq. So, I would like to start first of all with Thomas, who will talk about the birth of the EISA, its early years.
Thank you very much, Beste. It feels a bit like the old uncle is coming to town and you have to talk about the past and no one wants to listen. So thank you very much for coming. I joined the sort of EISA in 2004. It was then just not called EISA, and many of you might be confused today when you hear about the Standing Group on International Relations, and then there's EISA, and you might wonder what the hell has this to do with each other or not. And as a matter of fact, there's a longer history to this, and the older ones amongst you may of course know all this, but it's worth, I think, pointing out that EISA is a product of disciplinary politics. And it has a little bit to do with what we discussed in the first plenary about what is the international and who is the international. Because when I joined, when I was in those days, you were, as it were, appointed by the existing steering committee to become a member of the steering committee. There was a group of people that had been around for quite some time. And in fact, the history starts really in 1990. And of course, that was a time when two things coincided. One was a dissatisfaction with the Anglo-Saxon hegemony in IR. And of course, when we talk today about, welding IR and global IR and so on, in a sense, to some extent on a lower scale, we had the same, not we, people had the same concerns, except that in those days it was about, getting it out of the US really, and sort of making it clear to the ISA that they were not the universal ISA. And that coincided, of course, with the end of the Cold War and a completely new meaning of what Europe actually was. And so in 1990, and I think it was largely a core figure was John Groom at the time. In 1990, a group of scholars, and I think they were largely male scholars, so it was sort of an old boys network. They got together and they wanted to do something to establish IR as a community in Europe. And so perhaps it was their mistake. They went to the ECPR and said, whether they could become a standing group. And so this was when the Standing Group on International Relations formed under the sort of umbrella of ECPR, under the umbrella of political science. And it was completely unclear in those days, because the constitution of the ECPR didn't even know these kind of groups, what a standing group was. Then things developed gradually. In 1992, the first Pan-European conference was taking place in Heidelberg. And then it happened on a 3-year rhythm. So every 3 years, those Pan-European conferences were held. In 1995, the first issue of the European Journal of International Relations was issued. And this group of people got bigger and bigger. So imagine the first conference were a couple of hundred people. Now this year we're 1,200 something, you
Yes.
said earlier. At some point we were 1,400, so it fluctuates a little bit. But you can see how it's one thing to have a standing group of 200 people. It's a completely other thing to have a standing group of 1,400 people with a journal that has become one of the top journals in the field, etc., etc. And so when I was part of the steering committee of the then standing group, a few years after, we realized that we could not run this show as the standing group. We needed, so there were legal issues. There were issues about who would actually be responsible for the money. ECPR didn't want to be responsible for the money. So we were incorporated via Jaap de Wilde at the time as a Dutch charity. And that was untenable because it wasn't ECPR or standing group that was the charity. It was a Dutch charity that more or less Jaap vouched for. So we were, I love Jaap, but we didn't want to be eternally bound to Jaap de Wilde. So everyone in retrospect, many people in retrospect, claims that this was sort of a political shift and that we wanted to be independent from ECPR and we didn't want to be political scientists. Well, maybe that was true as well. I didn't want to be a political scientist, but at the end of the day, it was also a necessity. We needed some legal clarity. We had to ask lawyers to establish what were our duties as a Dutch charity, etc. And so then we decided in around 2011 that there was no other way than to actually establish the standing group as an independent organization that would have its own legal status. And this is how EISA started. It took us 2 years to find, we were thinking about different models. We also talked to ECPR at the time about different ways of organizing this, except that ECPR at the time wasn't very, shall we say, amicable and not very happy about these moves. And of course, that then created all sorts of problems. So we established the EISA as a Swiss charity. We are still registered in Switzerland. We established the EISA as a Swiss charity in 2013. We held the first European workshops in international studies in Tartu in 2013. And we organized the first PEC as EISA in Warsaw in 2013. And then shit hit the fan. The ECPR was very unhappy. It turned out that the contractual relationship about the EGIR was very disputed because several people had signed that contract, and it turned out that it could be interpreted in such a way that it was ECPR that was the owner or not. You don't want to know how many thousands of euros were spent on legal advice, and we even had to organize a mediator that would solve this problem. So now EGIR is actually co-owned by the re-established standing group. So when we formed EISA, we dissolved the standing group, and then ECPR organized a new standing group on international relations. And instead of writing interesting papers, we spent lots of time with lawyers trying to get the details of how we could organize this as a legal personality, EISA, and then our relationship with ECPR. So anyway, we now have a joint management committee that is working rather well, that organizes or that oversees the workings of the European Journal of International Relations. We couldn't call what became EWIS, we wanted to call it the Joint Sessions of International Relations. ECPR objected because they had the joint sessions. That was my portfolio at the time, and in retrospect, I'm so happy that they objected. So that's the way that it eventually could call this EWIS, which is now an established brand name, if you will. And the only last thing that I'm going to say is that one of the other things that over time then we changed was that we moved from 3-year cycles of this conference initially to 2 years. But it is because of you, probably not you, but the membership, that we more or less were forced to do it annually. Because as you can imagine, an organization of so many thousands or hundreds of people that need some organization. So you needed a bureaucracy, but you have to pay these people and, you know, the hands to your heart. How do you become members of associations? Normally in the year that you go to the conferences. And so every year that there was no conference, our membership would go down to zero, essentially. So there was no income, not from the conference, not from the membership. Who is going to pay the secretary? Who is going to pay, you know, all the expenses that you have on an ongoing basis? And it wasn't the meetings. The meetings were all funded by ourselves. You know, we had to sort of pay for that. So at the end of the day, we went in 2016. It was supposed to be from then on a yearly basis. And then 16, we had to cancel Izmir because of the introduction of martial law in Turkey after the failed coup attempt. But I think I will stop here and not talk about this because I ran out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. If there are any questions about that, we can always go back to the topic. So we will continue with Victoria.
Do I need to wear one of those as well?
Sorry.
Is it okay?
No, but you need this
You
for
need
the
to
video.
video.
Okay, we will pass it along then. Thank you. TV magic, as it were. So I joined the EISA board in 2015. So that was quite an interesting time because we, you know, as Thomas has outlined, you know, the new EISA was sort of just taking root and going forward, and we had the conference in Sicily, and then plans to have the first conference, the first PEC that followed the next year in Izmir. And then that was cancelled. And that then meant that, it was 2016, wasn't it, Izmir? So we had a lot going on. Yeah, 2016. So that meant that the 2017 conference was particularly kind of significant, and so was the EWIS that year, because we had this year where we had zero and things were very difficult. There was a bizarre sort of meeting of the General Assembly, as it were, in 2016, which had to take place. It normally takes place, of course, during PEC, and it had to take place in Rapallo with a very tiny proportion of EISA members, because it was the only meeting that we ended up having at that kind of time of year, and it was the only time we could sort of go through the General Assembly. So it was a strange kind of year, and very sad, of course, to have had to have cancelled Izmir. So that meant that the next year, EWIS, which was in 2017 in Cardiff, and the PEC in Barcelona were kind of big events. And I had, as I say, come onto the board in 2015, late 2015, and had initially been sort of responsible for Rapallo, and then somehow got talked into organising the Barcelona conference in 2017 with Burak Tanzor, who subsequently became another president of the EISA. So we both did the conference first, organised that, and then both went on to be presidents of the EISA. And that 2017 conference was, yes, it was pretty key for the association, as was EWIS, and a lot of work went into it. And I remember that being sort of a really intense period. I looked today in my kind of emails to see what I could kind of just sort of, you know, could I produce some numbers? And there were in there, and these are just the ones I filed kind of correctly, there were 4,436 emails that either myself, Thomas, Burak, or Katarina Kraus, who is, yes, up there, had to reply to at some point, interacting with section chairs, participants, but also local hosts, local organisers, board members, publishers, and so on. So in the run-up to all of this, I was working very closely with Thomas, and he said, you should put yourself forward as the next president. And I thought, well, how bad could it be compared to organising the conference? Because the conference was so intense. But it meant that I I was hosting this conference. Barack and I were running around in Barcelona, and then suddenly in the middle of it, I became EISA president as well. So it was quite the time, 2017 for me. And I thought, oh, but this is going to be okay. And what we've got is a really solid foundation here to build from, which we really did. So we fairly quickly set about being able to, kind of build on things that we'd always wanted to do that had been difficult before, with the cancellation of Izmir, before the settlement with EJIR, and it meant that we were now in a really nice place to do things that members of the board had wanted to do for a long time. So a mobility fund, which Thomas was always trying to get off the ground when he was president, we finally managed to launch that. We piloted things like the childcare scheme during EWIS in Cardiff, and my colleague Hannes Hansen Magnuson did a lot of work locally to organise that, and it worked really well, and it meant that we realised we had a template for this, and we expanded various portfolios on the board, something that others might sort of talk about, things like adding sort of mid-career development, early career development, and so forth. So it was a really exciting time. But what we also realised was we needed to move into the next stage of professionalisation, and one of the lessons learned from Barcelona was how with each Pan-European conference we had to work with quite different organising committees. So not just our local hosts, of course, who are academics who understand, but we had these local conference organisers, these associations who run professional conferences. And the differences between them were vast. So in some places they were superb, in other places they were difficult, shall we say, and Barcelona was not the easiest. I don't know if anyone remembers, if anyone in this room was there, but there was a coffee break when I literally thought, oh my goodness, I've taken my life in my hands here, because somehow the catering team had been told by the conference organisation team that the coffee break was sort of 15 minutes later, and I was standing there in front of everybody, and all these academics were flooding out from their panels, and I was standing between them and coffee, and I thought, this is a dangerous place to be. No one wants to get in the way of academics who need caffeine. So I remember running round, in my sort of poor Spanish, trying to sort of beg them to let people have coffee and cake, because otherwise there might be blood, as it were. So it was quite terrifying. So we realised that what we needed was a kind of a partnership with more consistency, more stability, and an association that we could work with longer term, who would understand EISA's needs and would kind of grow and develop with us and help us to professionalise. And that meant essentially, at the time, a member of the board, Ben Tallis, who was an executive secretary for a while on the board, sort of had this suggestion about the fantastic Cian, who now you will have interacted with, all of you as participants at the Pan-European Conference. So we essentially forged this new partnership with them and went into this kind of next sort of stage of EISA's development. That was quite entertaining as well, because it meant moving bank accounts from Brussels and moving all sorts of bizarre things to Prague from Brussels and Switzerland, and there was a lot to sign. There was a lot of boring, quite mad bureaucracy and a lot of random trips here, there, and everywhere. But eventually we did it, and I think it's been a really positive sort of development for the association. And Cian have worked fantastically well with us to kind of help us develop and grow, and also to understand our needs and who we are as an association. So that was a really kind of difficult and sort of hectic part of being EISA president, but it was ultimately a really positive sort of development in the association's history, I think. And just finally, one thing to say is that, and Beste was sort of saying this in the margins before we kind of came up here to talk to you, I had no idea just how much energy, passion, community, work, all that voluntary work that goes in from board members, like how much time and energy they sacrifice and how committed they are. And this really is a members association in the purest kind of sense of the word. And yes, I was very lucky. I was the first woman president of EISA, and I was only a senior lecturer, I think, at the time that I took on the role. So it was a really big deal for me, and it obviously gave me a bigger profile, and I got to meet a lot more people and be known amongst this fantastic community. So it was very beneficial to me, but it was a hell of a lot of work for everybody. And I'm just really proud of everybody who came before me and has come since and will do in the future for all that fantastic work they do for us as a community.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. We will continue with Valeria.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Beste. Could you take this a second so that I can actually pin somewhere? Is this okay?
Seamless.
Well, so thank you so much, Beste, for inviting me to contribute to this special event. It is indeed a privilege and an honor for me to join this distinguished panel of colleagues who have served in the board of our association. So it is the 10th anniversary, so it is quite a date, I would say. And from my experience, I've joined the board in 2017, so I went through different crises of the board, particularly, well, before you heard from Thomas, the ISME, which was, well, at the time I was not in the board, it was 2016, but I had organized the section that I run yearly, and we had, I remember the big crisis it was for all of us, so we had organized all the work, and then all of a sudden it disappeared. So hours and hours spent in the organization and in the connection of our scientific community that went somehow lost. And also the crisis of the pandemic, because I was serving during that time as well. So my term finished in 2021. And so we didn't have actually the opportunity to sit at the table at dinner and further those exchanges that you have at dinner tables, which are very important, of course, to develop further what is the intellectual vibe that there is within the association, and that can be prolonged even when you stopped serving. And we were actually promised a dinner that then happened on the same day of the section chairs dinner. So in the end, we did make up for it, if we think about it. And so we think perhaps we now made up for some of the consequences of the pandemics, and who knows if that is indeed what happened. And so we're no longer unexperienced, because we're 10 years old, and we have had some experiences, and we now know that there might be some external elements affecting what we do, but we're still young. And so being young, it means that we can still innovate a lot. And I think that is what I want to speak about, particularly the importance of EISA at innovating the field and the discipline, particularly through this connection that is created between those who are at different stages of their career, but also at different locations, so they actually live in different geographical places. But this cannot be always being described as a periphery or a center, because there's so much into these places that are layers, of different ways to be connected to the center of the debate, which happens here, particularly in the plenaries. So I actually had to go through my notes today and somehow reflect what had been discussed before in the plenaries to actually, innovate again on my speech, because it was already, somehow no longer updated, because everything that we discuss here contributes to knowledge, isn't it? And all of us, no matter what is the stage of your research, we contribute to that with our presentations at panels, with our questions at the panelists. We contribute to all of that, and that matters very much, but there is more. There is a connectivity among us that goes beyond the moment of the presentation. And it is what we truly contribute to the association. Now, some of us volunteer, no, for this role of participating in this governing of the association. Some of us get elected for that role. And then when we actually develop our portfolios, what we do is to put our way of understanding the discipline into those portfolios. Early career, mid-career, there have been incredible colleagues who have contributed to those. I've also been part of the joint management committee of the European Journal of International Relations. And so all this, all we had to go through for the let's say the passage from one editorial board to the other, that also happened while I was serving that joint management committee. And all of this, of course, you think, and now I'm speaking particularly to those who do not always stay at the center of the knowledge production, all of that you think, oh, how much responsibility, because it is a responsibility. And you represent someone, but you also expose yourself in doing that. All of this that we put into our service to the field is reflected in what will happen in the future special issue featured by the journal, in the future events that will be hosted. And therefore, the faces we decide represent the EISA, the pictures we put on the website, the words through which we describe the European International Studies Association, all this matters. No? All this matters, and for persons who do not live at the center of these sites and come here once per year or come when they have to contribute to the board's activities, all this is extremely important. And sometimes we perhaps do not reflect enough on the different bases upon which we contribute to the European International Studies Association. Because when we put faces to the development of the disciplines, that is a way to materialize some of the appropriation of these sites. And so that is absolutely important, that I think to pass the message to early careers researchers, to mid-career researchers, but also to all the other researchers and professors who are here and do not come or do not recognize themselves that the European International Studies Association is not only one specific definition of the discipline, but it is much more than that. It is for example, today, the three plenaries together. No? So you would then wonder, perhaps when we have this important gatherings of all scholars, and I was very happy indeed for Julio César to start with the Spanish. So I think that was brave and also very relevant. But when we organize the conference of our association, we should also think to a moment that is more horizontal, because sometimes the debate on the definitions of what is the discipline or which discipline for who's international, it has a possessive in it, no, a possession that can somehow make those who do not live at the center feel somehow disconnected from the center. And the European, so I would conclude with what I wish for the European International Studies Association, that does so much to embody all these differences. That is what has been done today with the three different plenaries. But what I wish the European International Studies Associations is also to make the practices of organizing a conference perhaps somehow more innovative, and think of a moment in which there's not only someone coming from some places as defining the discipline for everybody, but perhaps everybody should engage in a sort of more open discussion about how to reflect all of this at the same level and not in a sort of hierarchy of places. And I think for this, the intersectionality that needs to come more often, perhaps in these discussions, because otherwise we leave always the let's say the peripheral part of the event to different bodies. And I've been particularly happy to serve the European International Studies Association, because it actually gives spaces to all those different bodies, to all those different sensitivities. Perhaps it would be good to include also different languages, and so to have translations for some events. Now with the artificial intelligence, it should be much less expensive than before. And also to create innovative events in which we're sure that when we define the discipline, we don't leave anybody out. Because otherwise, this step that we need to undertake to change from a young, 10 years old, it's definitely perhaps it's a big date for the association, but it is not perhaps the time to have a voice to define what is the discipline for everybody. Perhaps that needs to come and needs to include. And that is what personally I think many of us do. The fact that there are so many Europeans or persons who work in different university who contribute to the board means exactly that we give the space to this innovation to take place, and it has been my honor in that sense to make sure that it wasn't exclusive for someone. So, this to give also a wish for what EISA should be, and I'm now leaving it to Maria to go more in depth on the development of what has been the secretary during the association. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria. Can you also pass the
Yes.
microphone?
Thanks, Beste, for this opportunity to reminisce together, because actually I'm much reminded of all memories collected, right? If Balzacq would be sitting in the audience with us today. Because when I had to do this necessary remembering exercise before coming here, I actually hit the wall a bit, because as Valeria said, half of our time in the board was the pandemic time. So time it was, and what a time it was. Which also means that there is something that has become almost too difficult to remember, because we really were in the uncharted waters, and there were many painful unravelings of the kind, as Thomas described, happened with Izmir. But I think now listening here, what we are actually doing here, of course, is reminding ourselves about the everyday of making a field, and of course making a community of the European international relations. And we are doing that not just on any other day, but on a Sunday of our community, which is one of our greatest gatherings, our pan-European conference. And I think maybe the sort of story of this 10-year-old EISA really has been balancing these difficult tasks and demands of actually creating and consolidating an organization, again, as the earlier presidents well described here, Thomas and Victoria, and then also keeping the community alive and going against the odds at the time when we could not do what is our usual business, that is conferences, at the time of the pandemic. And I guess that reminds us not only about, there is quite a bit of materiality involved in all these affairs. We've seen perhaps more than we imagined when all of us got involved with this. But it also reminds us of the importance of sort of not letting go the sight of what this is really for, right? And it is about this communality, and it is about creating this space of being able to talk to each other in an open and also very creative ways. Now, a bit more concretely, when I think back to these years, so we overlapped, Valeria, exactly. So we both came in 2017, which I think was a very hopeful time, as Victoria told us, for the association, because basically EISA was at its ascendance, in its might and in its greatness. There was this grand and beautiful Pan-European conference at the University of Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona in 2017, and then which perhaps still remains the largest PEC in Prague, at the Prague University of Economics and Business in 2018. Then we had this continuation of our Central and East European moment, so to speak, in 2019. So there was EISA in Krakow, at the Jagiellonian University, and then we had PEC at the Sofia University, St. Clement Ohridski. Again, you hear these names, and I think what is very noteworthy and indeed to the brand of EISA is that we get to go to these very exciting and oftentimes exotic places. We go to the universities, which is also in a way grounding us now and again with some of these, key practices and key questions we also grapple daily with as academics, right? And can do that also on our Sundays, so to speak. Okay, so this was all beautiful. It was also very exhausting, as I remember after this Barcelona PEC. We had a beautiful wine bar reserved and sort of welcoming of the new boards. And Victoria, the poor program chair, was so exhausted that she never made it to that wine bar. She just chose to sleep it off instead, which is, you can see what sacrifices actually have been made. But then came 2020, and I'm not even sure I want to go back there. But basically what, of course, happened was we had to fold back everything that had been planned, including the beautiful PEC in Malta, and for me personally, very painfully, the EISA 2020 we had planned together with Julien Jean-de-Beau in Brussels at the ULB. But again, on the plus side, we did sign the contract with the CIN, our management company, in that very difficult year. And I guess we were also forced to reflect how one can actually connect better, as we all were in our various academic practices, when we can't connect or see each other in normal ways. And hence, came all these innovations of webinars and professional skills workshops and whatnot, early career workshops. Obviously, there was the decrease in membership because no conferences, no members who would want to foot the bill then. And we somehow persevered. Honestly, I don't remember how, in terms of finances. This is the question to Juha, I think, who was then the man of finances. But we also got to try interesting things, such as I remember we just recalled with Beate Jahn, who was the president at the time, how we would have not just 2-day long, board meetings on Zoom. You can imagine the feeling if you still want to imagine it or remember that. I mean, the droning headache, so on. But we also had this very exciting online conference in 2021, it must have been then. And we tried out this particular virtual social platform where you could, meet in an Irish pub or in a nice wine bar, and this was the little joy of the tough times that we had, right? So I think, without sort of too many words, because most has, I think, already been said. It's very much now, I believe, part of each of our individual professional academic fabrics as well. The EISA calendar, right? We, in a way, remember many things in our life, perhaps, in conjunction with where this or that EVs or PEC happened. For instance, the very first EVs happened in my alma mater, the University of Tartu in Estonia. I remember what a fantastic event it was, and how very special, of course, it was also for a very small and, let's be fair, remote place to host actually the really the best of the European IR community there. And the workshops and the discussions were still something one can recall even now. And then the Warsaw, 2013. So oddly enough, yes, we did actually hit off in the Central Eastern European quarters, but we haven't stayed there. And I think it's fantastic that we are now in France, which is also a dream that those who have been on the board have long nurtured, and it's very, very nice to see this having come to fruition. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Maria. So we will continue with Thierry.
Okay. The first thing I want to say is how committed you are to IR. Because being here when other people are having aperitif outside in terrace to talk about the 10 years of the association, I think is just a sign of your love of the discipline, and and I'm sure when you go back home and file your report, you have to file one, you would say that you even stayed for this particular panel. So thank you. I'm very happy that we're able to do that, because what I have seen in certain associations is that you have these things being just written on the program, and then there is nothing really happening by way of trying to remember what happened, the way the association actually grew up, and these kind of things. And I think it's important to know that story as well, right? To know where it comes from, because it tells you a little bit about the kind of choices that the association has had to make at certain points of its evolution. And so what I will be doing here, what I want to do is really, there are things that I would be drawing probably from the very short time that we spend on the board, although it's long when you're there, because there are a lot of things to do. But 4 years in life is just 4 years, right? And you would see if you are elected that it really runs fast, because you don't have the time to actually think about years passing by because you're doing things. When the association was created, as Thomas actually said when he started, and thank you, Thomas, because there are certain things that you said I wasn't really aware of. I was more aware of the disciplinary kind of politics, about the visibility of the discipline, the fact that maybe the house of the ECPR, as it was at the time, was not very welcoming in terms of the diversity that the discipline represented and the growing discipline. That's the only story that I had. So thank you for offering a different
light there. When the association was created, we should remember that there was the so-called, now, the young scholars among us here would say, well, this is like middle age, right? But it was the so-called third debate, right? And that it was already full swing for 2 decades or so. But that's the context, the disciplinary context at the time. And in the wake of that third debate, that the discipline was really going this kind of soul-searching exercise about the theoretical orientation, the methodology, the normative implication of what we do, what we choose to do, and what we choose to write about, these kind of things, right? That's what the discipline was actually going through. And that's what was happening in particular in Europe, because also I was part of, with some people here in the room, we were part of what at the time, because it came out roughly at the same time, about the same time the association was created, the Manifesto on the Critical Approaches to Security in Europe, which was broader than security. So that's the context of that discussion. Again, it was this fight, or this quest of some kind of existential quest, right? Trying to be showing that things can be done differently. We can study different things using different kinds of theories, different kinds of methods, and they're also valid. And I think that's very important, right? And in North America, there was different calls that actually met that kind of concerns that we had, which Amitav at a certain point, the call for global IR was also, very vocal. And the most important thing there were about marginal voices. They were called like that, right? What are the marginal voices? And not only geographically, but also culturally, politically, gender-wise, all these kind of marginal voices in IR. And it's no wonder the series of EISA is called Voices, right? Because this is what the EISA was really trying to represent, or at least make all these voices welcome in the association. Now, I'm not arguing that this idea of diversity or pluralism in particular, as I call it, it is a third debate's invention. It is not. We know that in international relations, liberalism, for instance, was at least presented itself as a very pluralistic approach, right? Ontologically speaking, at least. But this time around, the pluralism within which EISA actually grew, from which it grew, was actually more progressive, at least it claimed to be more progressive, and more advanced, if not radical, right? That's one of the things. And you could remember, Rob is not here, but he was in another panel, inside, outside kind of discussion, intertextuality, these kind of things where, about the radicality, and we were in the wake of that. So you could understand why maybe the ECPR was becoming too small for the discipline. Right? So pluralism, if you read some of our declaration and some of the statements of many professional associations, and I would think we're talking about community, while building a community means also that you accept that people come from different walks of life, they have different political interests, and that means they're very diverse, different opinion, and you try to create a welcoming place for all these people to talk to one another in a civilized manner, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you try to do. And here, for international relation, you can call it international study because the Association European International Studies Association, and I think the Canadian and in particular the Quebecois will tell you that is extremely different from international relation. Now, it is also about the different philosophy of science, but also the rejection of any primacy of a particular philosophy of science. And I think in the discipline, that's something that we might think that debate is settled. It is not, because if you look at the endowment that is in certain places being given for the development of particular theoretical or philosophical outlook, you would see that fight of trying to accept different methods and different philosophy of science as equal is not over, right? There is also endorsement of different theoretical routes, And I think in that particular way, you have a special issue, EGIR, a couple of years ago, that asked that very provocative questions, the end of IR theory, right? But actually it was the acknowledgement of the diversity of different theoretical understanding of our object. But it's also the release from the hands of cultural imperialism of any sort. And I think that is something that EISA has done very well and has contributed in establishing as important. Now, if you look at the different programs, either AWIS, PEC, the way the EISA works, you would see that it has done what it can be to be a place where pluralism thrives. This is not just because I'm a member of the association, right? But I think from the outside, when you hear people talking, when they come to the conferences, they often say that they have fresh looks and fresh approaches to different things. And I think we have to really protect that, because that's why people come. People don't only come because it's European International Studies Association. People come because it is different the way it's organized, and it's different in the kind of themes that we present and how we open the net as wide as possible so that people can express themselves without running the risk of being, marginalized, right? But now, that was the good part. I would like also to reduce to some caution about, getting too carried away with what has been done, right? Because as you would know, any association, well, you don't only rest on your pillows because then you're dead, right? I remember, one thing that I remember from my realist class is that status is dead. Right? You die if you don't move, you have to move at a certain point. And in strategy, that is very important as well. Now, the first thing I think is important for one of the things that we have to keep in mind, this is really just like three things that I want us to think about. It is not, I have no answers, just, things that I've heard and things that I have myself been concerned with. The first one is the geographical reach. We talk about different reaches that we can, but geographically, I'm saying this because this is something that I put on my, when you want to be elected, we all like politicians, actually, I realize, right? We promise these things, and then halfway through your term on the board, you ask yourself, have I done what I promised to do? And I was reading mine, and there was one of them in terms of, trying to be that bridge, in terms of trying to make EISA reach places that it couldn't reach. Well, you would imagine France is one of them, right? I tried my bit. But there was another one that is dear to my heart as well. I think EISA is well equipped to attract large groups of colleagues from the Global South, what we now call the Global South, right? Given the theme that we cover, the services that we offer, and the travel facilities. When I say travel facilities, that we give money, right? And EISA has been really ambitious, trying to develop different schemes, right? But we're still doing very poorly, so we have to ask ourselves, why are we still doing poorly in terms of getting colleagues from other places to be members of the association, right? For instance, Africa accounts for 0.4% of EISA current membership, while Asia and South America represent 6 and 1.7% of our membership, right? That's the demography. The concern here is that if we don't do more in terms of trying to attract colleagues from these places, we might end up, speaking for, not speaking with them. And I think we don't want to do that. Right? One of the things that I have realized is that when we talk about diversity or pluralism in the discipline, we often have very good letters of intent. And we don't often do as much as we can to make that a reality. I'll give you one example. And I'm not saying that EISA is guilty of that kind of things, but we have to be careful. One of them is that because we run journals, for the moment, EGIR does not accept special issues. But let's say EGIR accepts special issues. In many places, we often say, you have to include people from the Global South. And I have done that myself, where I put special issue together, try to include colleagues from the Global South. And through the review process, they were the first to be kicked out. And then I went back to the editor and I said, well, I need some facilities in terms of mentoring, a different kind of peer review, and that was denied. Now I know that certain journals are trying to do it. right? Create a different way of making people grow, not making people feel like they just, shit when they apply to these things. Sorry for the word, but that's how colleagues will feel, right? If you want people to participate, you want to increase, you have to allow people to be accompanied properly, but also to get access to different kind of data, right? Because the first hurdle for many people is access to proper data. That's the first thing. So I'm happy to be an EISA member because it has been effective in developing a suite of schemes that can help people to do that. And that's a step in the direction. The second, 1 minute, yeah. Last person to speak after Raj. The second is that our association, like any other professional association which deals with political issues, is confronted with the challenge of different pluralism, right? There is a pluralism from the left and a pluralism from the right. So if you say pluralism, some will think intellectual superficiality, political complacency. If you say pluralism, others will think intellectual ghettos and self-contained, equally acceptable political project. And people will be pluralist on different grounds. Now, as you know, we live, again, that's a cliche. People say we live in an era of polarization. Well, that's, no. But that means something for professional association like ours. If you're in chemistry, that's fine. But International Study Association, that means any events that happens in the world hits you. And how does an association then, promote its diversity while keeping in line with what makes us being here together, for instance? That's a challenge that all these professional associations have to deal with, how to combine different types of pluralism within that community. So, I say the third one, I'll give just the last one for you to think about. The final point is that we often assume that pluralism is necessarily good, right? And the problem is that we have seen, and that brings me back to the political aspect, that one of the backlashes that universities and professional associations like ours would go politically might have to do with the way pluralism is interpreted or appropriated politically, right? We can think that we are pluralistic, but others might see us as relativistic. So this is a challenge for any association to see how it can position itself in this struggle. We cannot just duck the issue. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for your contributions, and let's give an applause to the previous governing board members of the EISA, and also for being with us today to share all this experience and all these insights.